How was Johnson able to escalate the war? Aims. What did Johnson do upon becoming president? How did the Gulf of Tonkin crisis and the 1964 election impact upon US involvement in Vietnam? Johnson's background. Genuinely believed his country fought for world freedom, as well as US security in 2 world wars, in both Korea and in Vietnam. If you let a bully come up into your front yard one day, the next day he'll be up on your porch, and the day after that he'll rape your wife in your own bed. As Vice President, he believed that the US should fight communist aggressors in Southeast Asia at whatever cost. Johnson was additionally a firm believer in domino theory, and he regarded it a matter of national honor to continue its commitment to its South Vietnamese ally. The impact of Kennedy's assassination. He was determined to stand by all Kennedy had done and by those who helped Kennedy do it. I swore to myself that I would carry on. 2 days after his succession, he told Ambassador Lodge that he was not going to lose Vietnam. In that sense, an interesting term, to lose China, to lose Korea, to lose Vietnam. He felt he had to continue the policies of his properly elected predecessor. Remember, Johnson had no mandate to change the policies of Kennedy. He had become president through assassination, not through a popular vote. Therefore, he retained Kennedy's advisors, and this meant that there were no fresh ideas on the Vietnam problem. Background then to Johnson's escalation. By July 1964, 200 Americans had died in Vietnam, and Johnson had added 2,500 men to the US force there. South Vietnam's war against the communists was not going well, but debate in Washington centered on how to help Saigon win it, not to help the United States get out. So the question has been reframed from the ambiguous nature of Kennedy's approach come the end of his term in office to a much now clearer proposition that Johnson is putting forward. Most of Johnson's advisors, Dean Rusk and Robert McNamara, were urging escalation. Johnson thought that if the time came for escalation of American involvement in Vietnam, he would need congressional and public support in order to justify it. He would not be a president that would fight his own wars without approval. This, however, was obtained through the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, and additionally, Johnson wins the election of November 1964 as president in his own right. August 1964, the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. For a decade, the CIA had been secretly sending South Vietnamese teams on sabotage missions to the north. In the first half of 1964, South Vietnamese gunboats raided North Vietnam's coast, and Johnson had approved the covert operations. During the summer of 1964, the Republican candidate, Barry Goldwater, was accusing Johnson of being soft on communism, so the president wanted to appear firm. Johnson claimed that the North Vietnamese made 2 unprovoked attacks on the USS Maddox and the USS Turner Joy in the Gulf of Tonkin. On the 4th of August, he asked for congressional support for avenging the attacks. The administration introduced a resolution originally designed in June to raise Saigon's morale. The Gulf of Tonkin incident gave Johnson the opportunity to get this resolution passed. Now, obviously, we are not going into detail here about the Gulf of Tonkin and what occurred. You need to look into that further. Believing that the lives of innocent American sailors had been jeopardized by the North Vietnamese, Congress willingly passed the Tonkin Resolution. The resolution gave the president power to wage war in Vietnam. The resolution would expire when the president believed the situation in Southeast Asia was safe or when Congress decided to terminate it. Mansfield objected, and another senator pointed out that they had no choice but to support the president when he said there was a crisis. But no one listened. The Senate had been 2/3 empty for the debate on the resolution, which it passed 88 votes to 2. Should Congress be blamed for giving Johnson the power to escalate the war? Johnson and McNamara were not totally open with Congress about the covert raids, the incident, or the implementation of the resolution. There is evidence to suggest that the administration waited for and even created the incident in order to get the resolution passed. The American naval missions were provocative in their own right, and there are many doubts surrounding the second North Vietnamese attack. So did Johnson exploit events both to escalate US military involvement in Vietnam and to win over the American public in an election year? The results and significance of the passage of the resolution were great. With the resolution, Johnson appeared to have the nation behind him. Now the war could really be taken to the North with all the public support that Johnson needed. The American aircraft bombed North Vietnam for the first time. This escalation made Johnson look tough, and conspicuously it's the first time the Americans are taking aggressive action. His public approval rating rose from 42 to 72%, helping him win the presidential election of 1964. Such is the impact that appearing tough on communism has on a domestic audience, and we've kept coming back to this domestic audience. Should Johnson now need to escalate further, it would be easier to gain approval from both Congress and the American public. The resolution and the presidential election suggested a nation behind its president in his Vietnam policy. The 1964 presidential election. During the election campaign, the administration noticed that the public had many questions about Vietnam, such as, why are we still there, and why are we there at all? Foreign policy decisions are rarely a decisive factor in presidential elections, but they played a more significant role than usual in the 1964 election. Goldwater, the Republican candidate, privately felt that the war was a burden and that it was not in America's best interest to make the war a campaign issue. Johnson was relieved, as this meant there would be no open debate on Vietnam. Johnson knew that if left-wingers accused him of being a warmonger, or if right-wingers accused him of being soft on communism, he might not get re-elected. He therefore reassured the left by saying that he did not intend to do anything rash or have a major war. He made a promise that might have been crucial to his re-election. We are not going to send American boys away from home to do what Asian boys ought to be doing for themselves. At Christmas in 1963, he told the Joint Chiefs of Staff he did not want to lose South Vietnam nor get America into a war before the election. He also gained votes by appearing tough over the Tonkin incident. So did Johnson plan to escalate once elected? Like Kennedy, Johnson hoped that Saigon would be able to win its own war. During the election campaign, neither he or his advisors knew for sure exactly what to do about Vietnam, but most were reluctantly concluding that escalation was the only answer.